I mean, you agree most people that use the term woke don't know what it means, right?
I think, as I said, when most people use woke, they mean it in that vague sense that I referred to, which is that there's been some shift in the left, and that's what they're referring to. They don't like whatever the shift is. They don't know what it is, but they don't like this shift. That's what woke is. Woke is this new left thing that they don't like.
Right. Okay.
And that identity politics is part of that. It seems like now there's a lot of people on both sides that don't like using the term identity politics because they associate it with something negative.
Can,
And so I'm asking you, there has to be some reason. They have to be intuiting more to the term than just this
well,
dignity concept.
so we had a late in the stream tiff that it was one of those, why are mommy and daddy fighting? Because I mean, I feel like we both kind of got triggered,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously, I'm partially to blame because uh, I didn't explain myself well at all. I mean, we've been streaming for like 8 hours, 10 hours. I don't know where we were at even, but look, I didn't explain myself well. I wasn't listening. Like I got triggered and I wasn't listening to what Sitch was saying. I went back and I re-listened to it. I feel like I have a better understanding of where you're coming from. We also had a phone call where I explained kind of my position. You explained your position, and we kind of just left it at, let's think about this some more. So I have thought about it some more and also done some more like looking into it and thinking about it. And I just, it's an interesting topic. I think people would like us talking about it. So
Mm-hmm.
do you, let me think here. So we had two conflicting definitions of identity politics. I've written out Sitch's definition and I've written out my definition. And I kind of want to argue why Sitch's definition isn't a better definition. And we can talk a little bit about, I understand why Sitch is like not into using the definition that my definition, which I think is closer to the standard definition. Not that
Mm-hmm.
that matters because
Well, it matters
at,
to an extent, but
well, at
it's
this
not the
point,
end all be all.
look, at this point, if you said, like, if somebody said, what's the standard definition of racism? I would say, I don't know if I can tell you that. Like, I don't know if I can answer that question, right?
I mean, I think the standard definition of racism is still the standard definition of racism. That's to judge someone by the color of their skin.
Right. But look, there's so many of these Zoomers out there. I don't know if they
Yeah.
are using that definition.
Yeah, but even if every Zoomer was using it wrong or using people's are, they're still the minority of the population compared to every other generation combined.
Okay.
Right. So
So so we're talking about identity politics here. Sitch's definition, and I'll just steel man. I guess you could read my definition, but I was going to ask you to steel man it first, so I shouldn't
okay.
have sent you this.
You should
Uh, Sitch's definition is identity politics is forcing a specific political profile on a person based on their identity. And the example would be black people must be progressive, which we hear all the
right.
time. So this is
Right.
Sitch's definition of
Or you're like
identity
you're not
politics.
black unless you believe XYZ.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think that definition is as useful.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you describe my definition? Can
Well,
you
I'm gonna
steel
read
man it
it.
without looking at it? Just steel man it without looking at it.
I don't know if I could honestly steel man it without looking at it because I don't fully understand your position. So
Okay. Okay, so we'll just read my definition.
okay.
My definition is identity politics is any political project where some identity group demands public policy that will bestow societal dignity on their identity group. Black people, gay people, trans
Right.
people, Christians, women, immigrants, shoplifters. Believe it or not, there are people out there that are now trying to bestow dignity on shoplifters.
Right.
Um, and then the conflict that I see between, well, I just look, if honor culture and dignity culture comes up, I think that that's relevant for the conflict between these two definitions. So my question to you would be, with your definition, how do we have a conversation about the gay marriage debate?
What do you mean?
Well, look, I feel like, and we've debated the gay marriage thing,
Gay people deserve the same rights to get married as straight people.
right? But there's a dignity component here that I don't think your definition illuminates in a way that makes us better advocates for understanding the people who are against gay marriage, so we can be more persuasive to fight their counter arguments, and doesn't explain the entire breadth of the situation. So I would say, like, gay marriage is the great gay marriage debate is classic identity politics, because you have two conflicting identity groups that are debating over some change to society that will take dignity away from them or bestow dignity on them. Gay people want the right to marry. They don't want civil unions, because obviously civil unions is like a second class marriage, and that would be undignified for gay people. They're like, look, we want marriage. The Christians, who are the counterparty here, are saying, look, redefining marriage takes dignity away from us, because we believe marriage is this institution between a man and a woman, and you're taking dignity away from the Christian community. I think that is exactly what's going on in this debate. I think when we've debated it before, we have not really understood or been able to debate against the Christian position well, because we don't even recognize it. We just completely dismiss it. We don't understand it. And I think if you look at it through this identity politics lens, I think you understand it much clearer, much better. We know exactly what we're debating, and we also can make counter arguments that address their concerns head on.
Right.
With your definition, I don't necessarily know how we have this conversation.
Okay. Well, there's two things. And I said this in the first conversation, and I said it on the phone too. If you think that looking at these issues through the lens of the interest group's dignity is a useful tool for understanding their arguments, I don't necessarily disagree with that.
Okay.
I'm on board with doing that. I just don't want to call it identity politics. Okay, so just call it something else. If you want to call it dignity politics, it's fine, or something else, but just do not call it identity politics.
Well,
that's my only contention. So, like, so the argument you're making, that's fine, but that doesn't address why we have to call it identity politics.
Well, this is why I wanted to talk about this, because since we had that conversation on the phone, look, people bring up identity politics all the time, and I'm listening to the context that they're talking about it, and I'm not necessarily sure that they know this consciously, but it seems to be intuitively they understand that identity politics is about this dignity thing for the group. So when I hear those conversations, I use this lens. Well, how do you disagree?
Well, because, and I want to go back to the gay marriage thing, because I don't even agree with the dignity thing, but putting that aside for a second. So it seems to me when people talk about identity politics, it's kind of like, excuse me, it's kind of like when I talk to people on the left and I say, do you feel that the left has changed substantially since 2014? And even the people who don't want to necessarily admit that there's like communism and wokeism is related, they kind of hem and haw, but they do acknowledge that there has been some change on the left. A shift has occurred. And this term of identity politics, I think people intuit, has something to do with the shift that's occurred from 2014 to 2016. Whenever people use the term identity politics, they seem to be referring to something, even if they don't know exactly what, they seem to be referring to something that happened on this left-wing shift in 2014. And the way that you're framing it with dignity, it could be applied to the civil rights movement. It could be applied to the gay rights movement. It could be applied to any left-wing movement that existed before 2014. And that's where that's why I don't like using identity politics in this fashion, because I, number one, don't think it is actually what people are talking about. So I think it is not hitting what people are intuiting, number one. And number two, as I said, is that it does allow the leftist subversion to grab hold and to say, no, we're just advocating for something that the left has always been advocating for, rights for individual people that just happen to be part of groups.
Okay. How do we let's use a specific example, the gay marriage debate.
Yeah, well, gay marriage is good.
Look, I would call that classic identity politics. Other people have called it identity politics. How does your definition work with the gay marriage debate with identity politics?
I don't call it identity politics. That's why I said I describe it as gay people deserve the same rights as straight people. It's
So,
not
but
identity politics.
so look, okay. So and this came up
Equal
in our
rights.
conversation. You call it civil rights.
It's civil rights, equal rights.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, on the Christian side,
Yeah.
when the Christians are saying you're debasing marriage, you're taking dignity away from our group,
Mm-hmm.
and they want their dignity intact because it's,
Right.
these are two, obviously there's a zero sum game going on here in the gay marriage situation. So the Christians are doing identity politics and the gay people are doing civil rights.
Yeah.
That's the way you would define it?
So, well, okay. I wouldn't define the Christians as doing identity politics either in this context.
Okay.
But to answer the question, how would I address the Christian argument, or not? Because not every Christian's making that. Lots of Christians are fine with gay marriage. The Christians that are making that argument, I think there's two things going on there. Number one, I don't think I even believe the idea that Christians that are making that argument are saying what's actually motivating them. I don't believe that. I believe that what's motivating them is just that they don't like gay people for whatever reason, and they don't want society to promote gayness, and they don't want gayness to be reproduced in society. And so they basically want to, add as many stopgaps as possible. I think that's the primary motivator to this. And anything else is just kind of post hoc reasoning.
Okay.
That'd be my guess here.
Okay. So
but that'd be number one. Okay.
So the way that I'm conceptualizing the debate, you're just fundamentally against.
I don't think that's actually what's happening.
Okay.
I don't think that's actually what's happening. But number two, if I were to just accept the framing, accept that it is some dignity argument, just for the sake of the argument, my response to that would be, well, you can say that about, and we've talked about this, you can say that about almost anything. When we live in a society with a bunch of different people, our rights as individuals are always in conflict with each other. Right? Like,
hell yeah. Yes, of course.
Your free speech is curtailed because you're not allowed to print a bunch of slander and libel about someone that is not true. You're not allowed to go put a giant billboard of like cartoon pornography across a public school, something to that effect. So our rights are all in conflict with each other. That's part of the whole point. And James Lindsay talks about this a lot. That is kind of the magic of liberalism and existing in these liberal societies.
Well, I would say it's more the magic of dignity culture, but not to interrupt.
Liberalism and dignity culture I would argue, are highly correlated with each other.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's that that liberalism is a framework that basically allows all these people with different ideas to exist alongside each other in a society without like murdering each other, without violence. That's kind of the whole point of liberal systems. And I think that's why liberal systems have produced the best, strongest, richest countries in the world. And so my argument would be, even if I would accept this kind of argument about, well, like the Christians are upset about it because it insults the dignity of their marriage, I would say, well, when you're talking about limiting someone's right to do something that you are doing, okay? If you're saying that I should be able to do an action, but someone else should not be able to do literally the same action, I think you need to put forward a very strong argument to prevent that. You need to put forward a very strong argument about the actual tangible harm that is created by limiting someone's rights. Okay. And just saying that it insults the dignity of my marriage in some sort of etherical way that you can't show physically or tangibly, to me, that argument is just weak sauce. And I say, well, you haven't made a strong argument, so you lose. We are obviously trying to live in a society where we try to guarantee as much equal rights to everyone as possible.
Right. Yeah, I would say the Christians are in the supremacist position. They're trying to deny marriage as an institution to gay people. Gay people are not trying to deny marriage as an institution to Christian people.
No, right. So they're the ones trying to limit the rights, yes.
Yeah. So, but I would describe it in different identity groups can advocate for dignity in two different ways. They can advocate for dignity and we're supremacists, we're better than everyone.
Right.
Or we can advocate for dignity and we're just as good as everyone and we should all be treated equally. This is what Haidt says when he talks about common enemy identity politics and common humanity identity politics, where he breaks them up into the two. So, but so let's move on from the marriage thing, because
let's focus on that for a second, because you brought up a good point, which I want to add on to, which is that it's difficult to make a dignity argument where you're like, well, my dignity it hinges
will preclude
on
somebody doing something.
Yeah, hinges on someone else being able to not do something that doesn't have any impact on me whatsoever, right? That's a hard argument to sell compared to someone saying, well, my dignity relies on me being able to participate in some institution that like
everyone
95% of the population is already participating in, and you're excluding me from doing it, right?
But I hate to say it, but I mean, you're kind of making my argument, because I'm saying that this is a better framework to have that conversation, and your definition doesn't really allow it.
No. But you can if you're talking to someone who's against gay marriage and they give you that argument, we can exactly have this argument and conversation. You can adapt their framing. That's fine. I just never going to call it identity politics.
Right. Well, I feel like you're using this niche definition of identity politics. It's not really, I don't really see in the wild, and I don't see the use for it. But let's move on to the trans women in sports, because the trans women in sports is more difficult, but it's the same exact thing. It's like, and this is what Vosh was saying in the video that we just covered. Like, he's basically saying,
before we move on, I should say one little thing.
Okay, go ahead.
And I just wanted to say, so because a lot of Christians, they make this fact claim about how they create the institution of marriage. That's just not true. That is completely untrue.
That is
1,000% untrue. Christians did not obviously create marriage. And I just came up in our conversation with Carl, even the idea of marriage in modern, conversations now, where it's like marriages of love, this is a relatively recent idea in modern history.
Very recent. Yeah.
Most Christians for most of human existence were not, kind of going along the lines of like marriages for love anyway. So this whole concept of like marriage is this like sacred thing that's been tradition about, none of that's true. None of that's true.
Yeah. It's hard to say when you're third wife that it's all about the love, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, come on. Come on.
So anyway.
It's more difficult, but it's the same framework. And this came up in the video that we covered with Vosh, because obviously he's saying, look, you have to accept all the package of the trans rights, or you're affecting the dignity of trans people. And that's why they keep going to this is a genocide of our identity, because that's what they're really talking about. They're talking about the identity. So trans women want to be able to compete in sports, and it's an affront to their dignity if you tell them no. Well, women are saying, look, we can't compete against biological males, and it's an affront to our dignity when you take away all of our opportunities and trophies. So it's like a classic identity politics framework here. So I don't know how you call one civil rights and one not civil rights.
I'm glad you brought up trans women sports next, because it's actually a really good comparison to the gay rights issue. Because as like with the framework that we're laying out with gay rights, it's like, okay, if you're going to preclude someone from participating in something, you need to show that them participating in it causes some tangible harm. Right. And so with the gay marriage thing, it's like, well, there's no tangible harm that's created unless you're going to make the argument that you just want there to be less gay people, right?
Well, they would argue that it affects their dignity. Like, that's really what
that's
they're
not
arguing.
A tangible thing, right? That's not a tangible. What does that mean? But this came up in the conversation with Carl
dignity is
too.
Not look. No, but this came up a tangible thing.
No. Because this came up in the conversation with Carl too. It's like, well, unless you're going to make an argument that gay people getting married is somehow making straight people's marriages physically worse, even psychologically worse, right? That's like ridiculous argument. Like there's no straight couple that's like, listen, we were in a very loving relationship. As soon as we found out that gays get married, we started fighting. Like that's not how any human psychology or behavior works whatsoever. Okay. And we can't build a society around the nosiness of people who have no business caring about what other people do, especially in our very libertarian-based American society, number one. Okay.
Look,
But
I just want to say I agree with you on the, look, I'm not on the side of the Christians
I
and the gay
understand.
marriage thing,
I
but to
understand.
say that dignity doesn't matter, I think is a
I'm not saying dignity doesn't
giant
matter.
stretch.
Well, it depends okay. Dignity is a massive category. Okay. So if someone says, I think I should get the same, like a black person says, I should sit at the front of the bus or eat at the same lunch counter as a white person, that has to do with
That's a
your
dignity
dignity.
question. It
Right.
does. Yeah.
Right. But that is a very tangible, like whole, like real thing that we can grasp onto. Okay.
But it doesn't
So
hurt you to sit in the back of the bus.
no, but it does because it has all these. For first of all, there's physical repercussions to that, but secondly, it does have all these repercussions that society is literally treating you as a lesser, and that's going to have all sorts of other ramifications down the road. Right? That's
I
what
agree.
it's literally saying. You are a less person. Okay, a Christian person saying my dignity is impacted because gay people can get marriage. People are not walking around treating Christian marriages as like less than because gay people can get married. That's not a thing.
Right.
So that's what I'm
Oh,
saying. It's
I
not.
agree.
So I'm saying like them making a dignity argument. I'm like, yeah, but you need to give me some. You have to actually make an argument about how your dignity is impacted in the real world. Okay. So, but going to the trans thing and why this is a good following from it is because in the trans sports thing, you can very clearly point to where the tangible harm is or could be, which is that, well, if trans women do have an advantage over cis women in a lot of different sports, then it becomes unfair to cis women because they'll all not be able to compete with trans women. Because that's the whole argument. And that's why people make the argument. It's based around the tangible harm. If trans women, if we lived in a scenario where you walked into your magical character creation machine and you came out, a man who walks into it comes out as like a trans woman, and they have literally like no like their body is like just physically a woman's body, right? So the only thing that remains is their soul, right? They have a male soul or a male consciousness or whatever the fuck, whatever, however you want to think about it, right? And so they had literally no physical advantage to cis women. Then I don't think we'd really be having this conversation. I wouldn't care. Most people wouldn't care, right? They just said, well, okay, there's literally no difference, but there is a difference. And there seems to be, a physical difference between a lot of trans women and cis women in terms of their participation in sports. And it seems to be tangibly physically unfair. And that's where the argument hinges on. It's not, to me, the dignity argument, again, is being used by people to subvert the real argument, which
Mhm.
is, yeah, but I like the saying, quote, the dignity of trans women is more important than the unfairness of them being able to dominate in certain sports. And I say, no, the unfairness is what's more important. Emma is saying the dignity of trans people is more important. And I'm saying, no, the unfairness of them being able to crush cis women in certain sports is more important.
Well, look, we're kind of we're arguing the framework here, and I'm trying not to argue the actual issues. But you make
Yeah.
my point when you say, well, if you're prepared to call what Emma is doing identity politics, I guess that's the thing. You're not willing to call what she's doing identity politics. But when Emma does come out and say, look, society needs to suck it up, the dignity of trans people is more important than women's sports, she is making an identity politics argument.
So, yeah, but okay. I mean, honestly, I think what the framework that you're talking about, I think is very useful because it does give people an understanding of what's happening. But I think the term should be very punchy so that when you say it, everyone, even people that don't know what you mean by it, because as you said, identity politics is kind of like wokeness. It's this vague, amorphous term. And whenever you say it, you're gonna have to define it.
Well, it's not.
Right.
Look, it's
So, but wait.
crystal clear
Let
for
me,
me
it's
now.
not. It's crystal. Yeah, it's crystal clear for you, but who cares? It's not crystal clear for everyone else in the
Well, we
entire
run a
world.
show. Look, I'm
It does.
trying to make
Okay.
it crystal clear for
Wait.
other people. That's the whole
Wait.
reason we're having
Okay.
this conversation.
I understand that, but wait. Let me just finish. Okay. I think that the better way to do this, because I do think that the term you're talking about, I disagree with you wholly that this is what people are not intuiting that this is what's going on with identity politics. And this is where our central disagreement lies. I don't think that's what people are talking about when they say identity politics. But I think that the argument you're making is a great argument and is useful. And we should be talking about this in terms of this dignity argument. And I think it's a new concept or a newer concept that people are not talking about. And so I think we should come
Okay.
up with a new term for it that makes it crystal clear to anyone that hears it what exactly you're talking about. And so instead of, and even I would say, Here, I just came up with this now. Instead of calling it dignity politics, we should call it weaponized dignity, because that's really what it is people using dignity as a weapon to try to take away someone's rights or to implement something unfair in the world.
I mean, it complicates it because you're saying, look, I can call it one thing and say when somebody is doing it through malfeasance and some person is doing it justly, I can make the separation. For some reason, you're just like, no, it needs to have a different name when it's used incorrectly. It's kind of like the ideology versus philosophy. It's like if it's something I don't like, it's an ideology. If it's something I like, it's a philosophy. So, but they really are kind of the same thing. So
Well,
I just
well,
don't see the value in separating them like
because
that.
as I've said, and this is where our central disagreement lies, and I mean, we're not going to, it's not going to be solved. You believe that when people say identity politics, the average person, when they use this term, they're intuiting this thing about dignity. And I don't believe that. I think they're talking about something completely different. I think they're
Well,
talking about this change that occurred that people don't really understand in 2014 on the left.
this is why I wanted to talk about it more and why I wanted to think about it more, obviously, because every time someone has said identity politics up until this point, I've not really understood what they're talking about. Now, when they say identity politics, and Jank brings this up in his book a number of times and says identity politics, I think of it, I conceptualize it the way that I'm talking about here, and it makes perfect sense. Like, so I just feel like I didn't understand what people are talking about. Now I do understand what people are talking about. So, but I am listening. If somebody says identity politics, and I realize the context of what they're saying is really your definition, then I will say, oh yeah, okay, look, they are using Sitch's definition. But up until now, and I've only heard, look, I haven't been using this definition for very long, so it's only happened to me a half a dozen times. Somebody starts talking about identity politics, or it comes up in a book or an article. It came up in that Russian thing that I sent you. Every time it's come up in the last half a dozen times, they're using my definition, and it seems crystal
Um,
clear.
I so
But if you can send me
okay,
examples of situations where it's using your definition, that would be super helpful,
okay.
and we'll just.
Here's the issue. So, I mean, first of all, you have to be careful because if there's a term that either of us doesn't understand, and then we create a definition for it, it's very easy for us to then see, oh, well, they're using it in a way that aligns with my definition.
This
Okay.
definition
Okay.
is all over Fukuyama, which I'm hesitant to mention
I
because
understand that.
it's
I
like,
understand that.
look, and
Right.
you're using the definition from the source James Lindsay,
Yeah, but he's using it from the original source,
which to me doesn't
which
matter
even which
because
even Francis Fukuyama acknowledged in his book.
I agree, yeah, but
Right. But
you're this is look, classically, there's only one example I can give you where your definition could be used, and they don't even say identity politics. They don't use the term identity politics. It's when Biden does the thing to Charlemagne and says, "Look, if you don't vote for me, you're not black," which is a situation that perfectly fits your definition. But he doesn't come out and say, "Look, what I'm doing here is identity politics."
no, no, no. Okay.
And
So
nobody in any
right,
article calls it identity
right.
politics. Maybe
So
if they do,
mhm.
you've got a
Here,
case.
right. Here's where I think the confusion is. Okay. Um, hold on, I gotta
I'm
sneeze.
not confused. I mean, I understand your definition and my definition perfectly.
Okay. So the confusion is, as I said,
Who's
identity
confusion?
politics, the general confusion between the public.
Okay.
Okay. Why Biden and why the New York Times isn't necessarily calling what Biden said identity politics. Okay.
Okay.
Um, it's the same identity politics exists in the same world as the term wokeness. It's kind of like this vague term that people use differently to mean different things.
I don't
Okay.
think
Would you agree
wokeness
with
means I
you
don't
don't
think
agree with
wokeness means identity politics. No.
no, no,
Wokeness
no,
for
no,
me
no, no.
has a
Wait, stop, stop,
completely.
stop, stop. I'm not saying identity politics and wokeness are mean the same thing.
Okay.
I'm saying that wokeness is a term people use and it kind of means a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. You agree with that, right?
To some extent, yeah, but I do
Right.
think it's. pretty clear what people mean.
What is it? What does it mean?
Wokeness?
Yeah.
Wokeness means being awake to systemic injustice in the world, and people on the right mean being awake to systemic injustice in the world that doesn't actually exist.
Okay.
So,
See, I don't think that's what people mean by it. I think people mean by it the exact same thing I mean with identity politics, which is that people intuit there's some weird change that occurred between the left. People don't really understand how or why that change occurred, but they think wokeness is a word to define whatever this thing is, right?
look, I don't. You're
Do you not
using this.
agree with that?
No, you have to at least admit that the left uses wokeness to mean awake to social, systematic, white supremacy, injustice, patriarchy, all that stuff. That's what they mean by woke.
Right, right. But that okay. If someone on the left is using it to mean that, then that perfectly aligns with what I just said, because that is the shift that happened in 2014, was the moving away from the liberal conception of civil rights to we need to become like the socialist conception of everything's these systems of power, right?
Okay, but when Ben Shapiro uses the word woke, he means somebody that believes all that stuff, even though it's not true.
Right. So he means exactly what I said. He means this shift that's occurred from the liberal conception of civil rights to the socialist conception of everything's systems of power.
Okay.
Right?
Well, I mean, sure.
Okay. So what all I'm saying is that identity politics, while it doesn't mean exactly the same thing as wokeness, I do think most people today see it as, they don't necessarily know how, but they see it as a component of wokeness. They see it as something to do with wokeness.
I think my definition is like a million times clearer.
I'm not saying, okay, we're not talking about what is clear right now. We're talking about what is going on with this word.
Right.
Because very often words are used and created in very unclear ways.
Whenever I hear a right winger use the term woke, they mean awake to white supremacy and patriarchy that's not real. That's what when they use the term, that's what they mean. That's what I hear. And that's usually the context of what they're saying. What you're talking about, I don't necessarily hear. Like
you do hear it. You hear it exactly. You're just using a different word to describe the process. Okay.
You're talking about some sort of shift from civil rights to some illiberal framework.
Yes.
Okay.
How is that not? It's the same thing. This is okay, because the way that, like, and we've talked about the way that people kind of understand the world is through general intuitive vibes, right? Mm-hmm. And then we try to explain those intuitive vibes with clear language. And this is part of why, this was part of Jordan Peterson's great gift when he first came onto the scene, was he would point to all these kind of like vague intuitive vibes that we all felt but didn't necessarily understand. And he would say, this is what's happening. Here's a clear language to describe the process of what's happening, right? And there's a lot of
totally agree. 100% agree.
Right. Yeah. So wokeness, I'm saying, existed in everyone's mind. Before wokeness, it was social justice warrior. Existed in everyone's mind as this vague intuition that most people didn't really understand why it was happening. But as people started to begin to understand why it was happening, the vague intuition becomes a more crystal clear, solidified definition, and then it transforms into this system, like, you know, systems of oppression, blah, 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 right? The definition that you put forward, which is accurate. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the vibe becomes clear when everyone starts to understand what's going on.
Okay.
Yes. And so, right. And so I'm saying that identity politics right now is still not even in the clear phase. It's in the vague phase.
And I think it is in the clear phase.
I don't, because first of all, number one, identity politics, people do have a sensation, an intuition. And I maybe you disagree with this. People, I think, generally have an intuition that identity politics has something to do with wokeness. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree 100%. Okay. And look, the Kidda, I listened to part of Kidda's thing, and look, people are totally against me on this. They believe you. They think identity politics just is synonymous with woke. I don't think those people are thinking very clearly. I'm not, I'm not afraid to say it.
That's fine.
If that, look, they're doing exactly what you're saying, Sitch. Yes. They're going off a vibe. They're like, look, I'm vibing that I think Sitch is right here. But
Right.
I think if you look at it from a cognitive level, what I'm talking about is very clear. When I listen to other people talking about identity politics, I think, oh, I didn't understand what they were
Okay.
talking about before. Now it's crystal clear. I understand
Let
what they're
me, okay,
talking about now.
okay. So your argument is, so I understand it. Your argument is you're saying we should adopt this definition of identity politics being the
No,
dignity one.
no. You adopt whatever
No, okay, okay,
definition you want. You continue to use
okay.
whatever definition you want. All I'm saying is, for me,
Right.
everything
Okay.
is locked in, crystal
Okay.
clear, totally
Okay.
makes sense. Every time someone says identity or identity politics, I'm like,
Well,
that's what they're
if you're
talking
not trying to
about.
make a persuasive argument, then I don't know what the point of the conversation is because I'm going to keep using the definition the way that I use it.
Feel
Okay.
free,
So,
because
okay.
look, maybe there's
Yeah.
2% of the audience, maybe there's 5% of the audience, maybe there's 10% of the audience. Maybe people will start hearing identity politics and think, which definition are they using? Adam's definition or
Okay.
Sitch's
Okay. Okay. Okay.
definition?
Okay. Okay.
And it'll get worked out over time.
Okay. Fair
That's
enough.
how
Fair enough.
things look.
Yeah. Okay. That's
The
fair. I
world
don't have a
is
problem
what
with
it
that.
is.
Right. But okay. So your argument is that there is, okay. Your argument is non-persuasively. Your argument is that when people say identity politics, they mean this idea about dignity, about groups, people that are part of some group trying to
Compete for dignity.
compete
Yeah.
for dignity, right? Okay, that's what they're referring to. Okay, that's your
Yes.
argument, right? Okay, my argument is that this is a term that was created in the 70s by radical socialists that they described themselves and the term as radical as a means to move away from liberal ideas to leftist ideas based around your identity, based around the collective group identity. Okay. And my concern, which I don't feel like you've addressed, and this is the concern that I had in our conversation on the phone and on our original conversation, is I do see right now very clearly to me that a lot of leftist tactics is to take a term that seems innocuous, like critical theory, or even defund the police, which doesn't seem as innocuous, but whatever.
Yeah,
Is
defund the police is
right?
not
Not
innocuous at
innocuous,
all.
right?
Yeah.
But it was a term that like the leftists, radical leftists, put out there in the world. And then when people say I don't like this, they try to like say, oh, it doesn't really mean this bad thing. It means this kind of
Identity
like
politics is not an
thing.
innocuous term. Everyone hates the term. So what?
Right. So,
So
but
what are
this
you
is
saying?
so that's the thing. Identity politics comes into the play. Everyone hates the term. If people were using it just the way that you were using it, or Fukuyama's using it, or like this competition of dignity, why would people hate the term so strongly?
Civil rights was basically reframed as identity politics because identity politics is a terrible term. Like that's the whole point.
No, 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 no. That's not true. What do you mean?
Everyone hates the term identity politics.
Yeah, they hate it now. That term didn't exist in the civil rights era.
It came in after the civil rights
Yes,
era.
right.
Yes.
Okay, right. So what I'm asking you is, if
but
the
you're saying, look, you're saying it's an innocuous term that the socialists
innocuous sounding term, like the words identity and politics necessarily don't seem scary, right?
Right.
They seem scary because we all have intuitions about what it means.
And the socialists came up with identity politics as a way to brand something good and like it's newspeak, right?
Yes.
What were they branding?
What I said, the idea that we need to move away from individual liberal civil rights to collective based existence where your politics have to be based on your race or your queerness or whatever.
It would just be awesome
Yeah.
if you collected examples of people using that term in that context.
Okay.
That would be great.
Right. Okay. Maybe I'll go.
That would go a long way towards this argument.
So,
yeah.
Okay. So my question to you is, as you said, identity politics, everyone hates the term. And why, I'm asking you, why do you think they hate the term if it just means this people competing for dignity?
Because it's associated with things like the gay marriage debate, the trans women in sports debate. Like
I don't think it's associated with gay marriage at all. But I think it's associated with the trans sports debate. I don't think it's associated with gay marriage at all.
Yeah, because these dignity fights that are zero-sum games are completely toxic. People walk away with a vibe like, oh man, identity politics is brutal. I hate that.
but it's different because, like, okay, in the civil rights era, people were saying they want rights, they want their civil rights. The term civil rights did not become branded by both sides as like a bad thing. Like I'm sure like the racists that didn't want to give black people rights didn't like the term civil rights, but both sides are not looking at civil rights as a bad thing. It seems like now there's a lot of people on both sides that don't like using the term identity politics because they associate it with something negative. And so I'm asking you, there has to be some reason. They have to be intuiting more to the term than just this dignity concept.
Look, I already answered.
Okay. Well,
but
then why does that not apply to civil rights then?
Well, civil rights wasn't a zero-sum game. That's probably why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it could be. What do you mean? I mean, this is the people that make the argument about freedom of association. They make it a zero-sum argument, right?
Right. And they're the ones that call civil rights identity politics.
Sure, but that's what I'm saying. So, but that's what I'm asking is why, like, there seems to me very clearly a difference between civil rights and identity politics in terms of how everyone perceives these terms. Like the term civil rights doesn't have a negative connotation for most people, but the term identity politics seems to have a negative connotation for most people. Even people on the left kind of don't like the term.
Let's just leave it here.
Okay.
If you encounter, look, I'm listening.
Yeah.
When I hear people, it comes up, infrequently, but it does come up. And I'm listening to the context of what people are saying. If you find good examples out there in the wild that make your argument, send them to me. Let's just look at them.
Okay.
Right?
Like
I'm not going to send you a bunch of examples because like I feel like I'm beating you over the head with it.
Well, it's not going to matter either. But to my argument, because like, well, unfortunately, while we were talking, I did go to New York Times and I type in identity politics, and I wanted to look and see how they were using it. But the New York Times search function is so awful. It was giving me all these articles where if you hit Control F, identity politics, it wasn't even in the article. So I don't even know. But so I'm curious. I'll try to look through. I'll look at like New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, see how they're using this term, see what exactly is happening there. Right. You
agree most people that use the term woke don't know what it means, right?
I think well, it depends. I think, as I said, when most people use woke, they mean it in that vague sense that I referred to, which is that there's been some shift in the left. And that's what they're referring to. They don't like whatever the shift is. They don't know what it is, but they don't like this shift. That's what woke is. Woke is this new left thing that they don't like.
Right. Okay.
And that identity politics is part of that.
All right.
Okay.
So we clip it, CT. Look, it's over now. I already said it.
There you go.
Look, that was a great discussion. Look, if you have any final thoughts before we end the video, in the clip or whatever it is.
No, I mean, there's like some super chats. I don't know if you want to include them in the clip or not, but
no, let's not. And
okay.
But we'll read them now.
after. But
all right, good show. Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.